Yeah, we know. Yes, there will be something done for that one. That's true. Right. I did good.
Good morning, everybody. Let's grab our hymnals, the great hymns of faith. Let's turn to page 389. 389. I am resolved no longer to linger, charmed by the world's delight. Things that are higher, things that are nobler, these have allured my sight. I will hasten to him, hasten so glad and free. Jesus, greatest, highest, I will come to thee. I am resolved to go to the Savior, leaving my sin and strife. He is the true one, he is the just one, he hath the word of life. I will hasten to him, hasten so glad and free. Jesus, greatest, highest, I will come to thee. Let's all stand and sing the last. I am resolved, and who will go with me? Come, friends, without delay. Taught by the Bible, led by the Spirit, we'll walk the heavenly way. I will hasten to him, hasten so glad and free. Jesus, greatest,
Good morning, everyone. Brother Albert, can you lead us in prayer?
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the many things that you have in our lives. Watch over us in our service today, Lord, that we may open up our ears and hearts and understand what has been taught and said and apply it to our daily lives. Forgive us, Lord, when we failed you. Answer all the prayers according to your will, Lord. Watch over Brother Russell as he brings forth the message. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen. I like the last verse of that song, taught by the Bible, led by the Spirit. Okay, so today, my devotional, we're going to start off in Matthew chapter 4. So Matthew chapter 4, my devotional is going to be is titled Fishers of Men. So what inspired me about for this devotional, some may know I have a lot going on at work right now. So I've been finding other alternatives like side jobs and stuff. So I had a side job over this week, and it's new to me. So I learned to throw the bit out to see, and I almost felt like I was fishing. I threw the bit out, waiting to see if I'll get the catch to get the job. And then that idea kind of stuck with me, and I thought, well, there's a devotional out of this. And then, so I went to Fishers of Men. So I started saying, let's go ahead and read the verse. Now, as Jesus was walking by the sea of, verse 18, chapter 4, verse 18. Now, as Jesus was walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, who was called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. So when you think of fishermen, I started asking myself, what traits, what do you need to be a fisherman? Well, you need patience. You need to be calm. And most importantly, you need to have a love for fishing. So love is the motivating force for a fisherman. So applying it to fishers of men, we bring the lost to Jesus. I'm losing my place. Fishers of men is to bring the lost to Jesus. Verse 19, and he said to them, follow me and I will make you fishers of men. Immediately they left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, in the boat with their father, mending their nets, and he called them. Immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. Now on verse 22, it says, immediately they left. So that just goes to show Jesus said, follow me, and then immediately they followed him. So fishermen catches live fish to die. Fishers of men, this is a key point right here. Fishers of men catches men dead in sin to become alive through Jesus. So we see the example of right here, four men actually, being called by Jesus, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. And it shows that immediately they went. So now we're going to look at another example of someone who was called by Jesus. So let's turn over to Mark chapter 2. We're going to be in verse 14. This is about Levi, also known as Matthew. So verse 14 of Mark chapter 2. As he passed by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting in the tax booth, and he said to him, follow me. And he got up and followed him. So again, right here, we see Jesus calls, and immediately he goes. And we see the willingness of it. So it's almost like saying, hey, let's go on a fishing trip. Okay, let's go. It's that type of willingness that we see the disciples have. And then continuing on, verse 15, and it happened that he was reclining at the table in his house, and many tax collectors and sinners were dining with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many of them, and they were following him. When the scribes of each Pharisee saw that he was eating with the sinners and tax collectors, they said to his disciples, why is he eating and drinking with tax collectors and sinners? And then right here, I have this highlighted in my Bible. And hearing this, Jesus said to them, it is not those who are healthy who need a physician, but those who are sick. I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners. So let me find my place. I'm sorry. So Jesus is our physician. When we realize that we are sinners, when we realize that we are sick, then we look to Jesus for help. So what I'm, going back to my job with all this has only made me look more and more towards Jesus, pray more and more to God, and has only increased my faith. Because, and a lot of, now some personal, what I see, I don't see a lot of people who have that same salvation, that same thing to look forward to. I hear a lot of, like this, someone told me they have to do what they have to do so their family doesn't have to do it. And I saw a man who didn't have anything to look for. He had nothing above him. I mean, not to say that he didn't have a salvation or anything, but I noticed that for me, I prayed to God, relied my faith in God to get me through the situation. So that is an example of him being the physician. So when being fishers of men, the first thing we need to do is follow Jesus. That's when he calls you, follow me. Then it's up to you. Are you willing to, just like how the example of going on a fishing trip? Yeah, that sounds fun. When Jesus calls you, how willing are you going to follow him? Second, after that, read the Bible. God speaks to us through our hearts. So men can read the Bible. I noticed this over the week too. Men can read the Bible and not understand it. But they typically have a hardened heart, just like Pharaoh. But if you have an open heart and you are following Jesus, God begins to speak to you through the word, through your heart. And then the Bible starts to make sense and unravel itself. And that's when you can look at this big, wow, there's so much to learn. It's the whole mindset, I guess. So in closing, being fishers of men is not really bring people. Even if you feel you are not, okay, here we go. Even if you feel like you aren't catching anyone, because that was happening to me. I felt I was witnessing, but I just wasn't making a catch, so to say. And then I had, through praying, God helped me realize I'm not the one who does the catching. I'm not the one who does the saving. All I'm doing is simply just actually spreading the seeds or watering the seeds. That is what we're called to do. We are not the ones that do the saving. So live a Christ-like example, and it really goes a long way, even from waking up on Sundays and walking out of the house. Our neighbors see that, and that is also planting seeds, and that is also watering seeds that have been planted. So with that, that's my devotional, and I pray that, I try and encourage everyone to pray to God and just to give us an example, or to give us an opportunity this week, just to witness, or just to be fishers or men, or water some seeds planted. So thank you.
Turn to page 132. 132. I serve a risen Savior, he's in the world today. I know that he is living, whatever man may say. I see his hands of mercy, I hear his voice of cheer. And just the time I need him, he's always near. He lives, Christ Jesus lives today. He walks with me and talks with me along life's narrow way. He lives, salvation to impart. You ask me how I know he lives. He lives talks with me along life's narrow way. He lives, salvation to impart. You ask me how I know he lives. He lives within my heart. Rejoice, rejoice, O Christian, lift up your voice and sing eternal hallelujah to Jesus Christ the King, the hope of all who seek him, the help of all who find. None other is so loving, so good and kind. He lives, Christ Jesus lives today. He walks with me and talks with me along life's narrow way. He lives, salvation to impart. You ask me how I know he lives. He lives within my heart.
Good morning, everybody. Enjoyed the devotional. And I think there's, we talk about that topic, from, I'd say quite often, and even my sermon's going to lightly touch on it, and maybe not the exact idea of being fishers of men, but the idea of being a witness and an example. And I love the fact that we always talk about it. It's a constant reminder because it's really what we were left here to do. We're literally here on earth to make disciples of God. And so good devotional, good thoughts. We'll open things up for prayer requests. There are a few announcements. I don't know, I had the dates written up here, I thought, but we have a few different rallies coming up. We've got one just right around the corner this weekend, and it is at the San Dimas Church. They're calling it a gospel rally, not a youth rally. And the idea is aimed at really bringing people who, again, being fishers of men, bringing people that need the Lord and people that we've been working on and witnessing to, and having a good old gospel sermon in there. So that's this coming Saturday. It's at 4:00 p.m. So I know that's also the day of our work day. So we have a little bit more discussion on today. We have to talk a little bit more because there's still some plans up in the air with our work day and exactly what's going to happen. So we'll talk about that at lunch. Another youth rally is at the Houston Church. What was the date on that, Rick? Because I haven't written that down.
Second full weekend.
Oh, I did write it down, but you can.
Ninth or something like that.
Oh, yeah. You said the first or second week.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's the second or the ninth, but I'm pretty sure it's right. Is it?
It's not October, it's November.
Okay, November 6th. That's what I've been waiting on, is actual date. Okay. And then we have another one in Citrus Heights. So I know two of these are really far up north. I wouldn't be doing my duty and encouraging, the other churches if I didn't announce them. And again, encourage us to go if we can. October 16th at Citrus Heights. That's Northern California. They're having a youth rally at 11 o'clock. One other thing, just as a way of, still an ongoing prayer request, still also you look at it as a praise. We've been praying for the Maney family, but a lot of those concerns are slowly getting better. And so it's been, I don't know if Frank has an update or Paul's an update that conflicts with this, but I do know that as of Wednesday, we were praying because both Mike and Vicky were in the hospital. Actually, that's not true. As of Wednesday night, Mike had gone home. But throughout the week, we were praying for both of them. Mike had gone home, and then Friday, Vicky got to go home. And so that means they're on the mend. That means they're getting better, and that's what we're praying for. Not to immediately one day wake up and be better, but to get out of the hospital, get off, any form of nursing care. And so they're both recovering at home. And so we want to keep praying for them. We're up to date on that, right?
Yeah, they have one church member who's not doing well, he's still in the hospital, and they put him in a induced coma. But yeah, he's an older gentleman. I think he's in late 70s, early 80s. So his name is Ben. I don't know his last name.
Okay. So Ben is a member of the church, and he's not doing well at all. He's in an induced coma. And so obviously that's not something you do early on in a process. That's something you do as kind of a last ditch effort to try to help the body to, recover from whatever it's ailing it. So keep the church in your prayers, and this gentleman, Ben, that is a member of the church there. Any other prayer requests? Anything on your hearts? Julie? Okay, so, and it's your friend's daughter, a young girl who had a brain aneurysm, and she's going in, did you say Tuesday? So obviously another serious thing. Let's keep Julie's friend in our prayers, who asked specifically for Julie to ask prayer request. I enjoy when people know to ask us to pray for them, so that's a good thing. Let's pray for Julie and her friend. Anybody else? Dave?
Yeah, 2 weeks ago, I went to the doctor because I'm unable to raise up my right arm. So he gave me some therapy. Not helping, so tomorrow I'm going for X-ray. I'd like that church prayer.
All right, well, sorry to hear that, but I'm glad you brought it before us. And so just remember, Dave is having problems with the shoulder, can't lift it up. And so we've got multiple shoulder problems plaguing this church, but quite immobilizing, I'm sure. Let's pray for Dave. He got a doctor's appointment to see why. Anybody else? Any prayer requests? All right, if we're all good, let's have our morning offering.
Let's turn to page 489. 489. Down at the cross where my Savior died, down where for cleansing from sin I cried, there to my heart was the blood applied. Glory to his name, glory to his name, glory to his name. There to my heart was the blood applied. Glory to his name. I am so wondrously saved from sin. Jesus so sweetly abides within. There at the cross where he took me in. Glory to his name. Glory to his name. Glory to his name. There to my heart was the blood applied. Glory to his name. Come to this fountain so rich and sweet. Cast back our soul at the Savior's feet. Plunge in today and be made complete. Glory to his name. Glory to his name. Glory to his name. There to my heart was the blood applied. Glory to his name. Number 40. 4-0. Great is thy faithfulness, O God, my Father. There is no shadow of turning with thee. Thou changest not, thy compassions, they fail not. As thou hast been, thou forever wilt be. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Summer and winter and springtime and harvest, sun, moon, and stars in their courses above, join with all nature in manifold witness to thy great faithfulness, mercy, and love. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Let's all stand and sing the last. Pardon for sin and a peace that endureth, thy own dear presence to cheer and to guide, strength for today and bright hope for tomorrow. Blessings all mine with 10,000 beside. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me.
I'm going to go to the Lord in prayer. Brother Derek, would you lead us in prayer?
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day of life. We thank you for the privilege to be in your house this day. Pray that all things done and said might bring honor and glory to your name. Pray you might be with our pastors and things to study. Be with those that are not here, that you might watch over, protect them, bring them back to us safely. Pray you might continue to be with the prayer requests that were brought before the body. Pray that all things might be done to give honor and glory to your name. We ask in Christ's name.
Amen. It's some really good song choices this morning, and love that song. What a thing to get to praise God about. You know, we live in this flesh, and it's sometimes hard to be as faithful as I think we want to be. And I think there's We're here today because there's a good part of us, and I don't mean a sliver, I mean, there's a good portion of us that really want to be faithful unto God in every way. But we contend with the weaknesses of this flesh, and we contend with the world and each other and our loved ones. And there's a lot of things that conflict with what we want to do. We don't always do what we want to do, but we strive. And again, last week we're going to kind of play off. There's some, I was going to bring the points forward right now. I want to wait. I'm going to hold off. But there's things that we want to do. We want to be being ready. And but the good thing is in this equation of working with God and striving to be like him and being faithful, we don't have the other side of the coin to worry about, which is, will he be faithful unto us? That's something that any relationship is a factor. We're trying to be good to each other, and I want to be a good husband, but I'm not the only factor in my marriage. And so there's only so much I can do in that regard. And sometimes you have marriages fail. You have siblings who fall away from, they can't, get along. Sometimes it's children with parents. It's all sorts of relationships because we're not the only factor. There's us and there's the other. And sometimes out of our control is their actions. But in our service to God, whether we're in him, serving properly or not, and abiding in him, it's all on us, right? Because he is absolutely 100% faithful unto us. And so we don't have to worry about that side of the equation. Will God be righteous and faithful unto us? So I love that song. And it's always one of those things I think worthy to praise God over, not just his glory, his awesomeness, but just his faithfulness. What a thing. Let's turn in our Bibles to the book of Exodus and read a few verses here. A passage I'm sure we're all familiar with, story that I've referenced many times, not maybe this chunk. I may have gone over some of these verses, but I know I've talked about the 10 plagues in the past, and we refer to the 10th plague all the time. I talk about the death angel plague, the application of the blood of the lamb, the importance of that in order to be set free from the bondage of sin. And certainly Egypt represents the world. And in all of this, we have Egypt, where God's people are. Of course, there's a lot of parallels here. There's one where the 10th plague represents the application of the blood of the perfect lamb. And through its application, that there was mercy given instead of judgment. And from that mercy, not only came the allowing the firstborn to continue living, but also that through that plague came the release of Israel from the bondage of sin. And so we see that application in our spiritual life, where we apply the blood of the lamb to our hearts, and through that we are released free from the bondage of sin, and we're born again. They get to the waters of the Red Sea, and then they pass through the waters of the Red Sea, which represent baptism, and then the wilderness, which represents life, the Jordan, which represents passing over to the other side, and the other side is the promised land. So this great illustration. We also see an example here of just God's people being in Egypt. So that picture aside of the 10th plague and the Red Sea and the wilderness, we have this illustration of, this time period where Israel, God's people, were in bondage and surrounded by Egypt, which does represent the world. They were in the world, but they were not of the world. And so we see parallels to just God's people existing within God's enemies. And they're having to be, again, there's some hardship that they face because of it. And I think there's a great few verses here in the 9th plague that really kind of just clearly just reveals to us this illustration of God's people being in the world, being in darkness, but God's light still shining in their life. And so I want to pull from this illustration before we continue on. There's going to be not any similarities between this week and last week, but I'm going to kind of play off of last week and move things forward from that topic. And we'll talk about that in just a few minutes, where I want to take things, differentiate last week from this week. In Exodus chapter 10, we're going to read verses 21, 22, and 23. And it says, speaking of this 9th plague, Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand toward the sky, and there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, even a darkness which may be felt. So Moses stretched out his hand towards the sky, and there was thick darkness in all the land of Egypt for 3 days. They did not see one another, nor did anyone rise from his place for 3 days. But all the sons of Israel had light in their dwellings. Of the 10 plagues, as a quick refresher, we have the plague of blood, the plague of frogs, lice, flies, the disease on beasts, the boils, the hail, the locusts, and then we have this one, which was darkness, and then the 10th, which was the death of the firstborn. It's one of the plagues that stand out to me. It always has. And so that's why I'm sure I've at least referenced this story in the past. This story always resonates with me. And this thick darkness, it's kind of an interesting thought, right? Not the idea of some darkness, or it makes it this absolute pitch blackness that's so dark. The absence of light was felt so greatly that you could feel its absence. That's kind of a strange thought. You could feel the absence of light. And where we've talked about light and darkness in the past, and there'll be some referring to those verses too in just a little bit. We talk about the light of the world, we'll reference Christ. How can we not? But we know this is something you're taught in school, that darkness is not something that's projected. It's the absence of light. So we have light, which is, something, and then we have darkness, which is absence. It's nothing. It's nothing. It's the absence of light. And so how do you feel it? I think you feel darkness, you feel the absence of light. And I've never been in that situation, but the Bible makes it clear that there was absolutely so pitch black that one could feel it. And it refers to it as thick darkness. And I've heard stories. I remember growing up in church where my father was preaching, talk about being in dark. You may probably remember some of the stories about being in these dark caves in the earth where they would turn off the lights. And he said it felt so dark that you could feel it. We could just feel the absence of light. And I've never been in that situation. But the reason why this story resonates with me is something that some of you know, not to draw attention to it because it hasn't really affected. Oh man, I don't believe in knocking on wood, but if that's any chance that I could keep from this being a problem now that I'm mentioning it, it hasn't been a problem for a while. Sometimes it does affect me at home. But as most of you know, I have a really bad problem with one of my eyes. I have an eye injury that I sustained years ago, and it just can't fully heal. And doctors have told me that I think one time Squigs told me, because he has, ironically, we're siblings and we have the same problem. So I don't know, Winkleman's eyes don't heal properly. He has the exact same problem from the exact same thing as I do. And one time when he saw the doctor, they're like, well, one thing we could do is scrape all the film of your eye off, and then it might all grow back. And he's like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not willing to do that process either. But this gouge where, my eye was gouged out, it heals, like there's like a film that covers it, but it's not the same material. Like it doesn't connect back with that flap that's over your eye. If you've ever had LASIK, they talk about, they cut it and they pull it back and then they do the LASIK, they lay the flap back over and it heals. Well, because the gouge is so wide, it can't connect, it can't heal. So sometimes I wake up in the morning and the injury reopens, and it's just something that the doctors told me I may never fully recover from. And it's something I deal with from varying degrees, right? And I have sometimes it's like, I call it like a 2 or 3, where it's just like on a scale of 1 to 10, it's like a 2 or 3. I can get up, I can function, but it bothers me. Some days a 5 and I have to lay in bed for a while. And I can't just get out of bed because I can't keep my eye open. But there's times it's like a 7 or 8, and it's painful. And the worst is when it gets infected, and it does get infected. So I have actually had to go on multiple occasions, especially once it gets infected. I've had to go days on end where I cannot open either of my eyes. And the way I explain this is like, if you have one eye open, well, that eye moves. When you have a really bad eye injury, you can't have any shifting, any shifting of the eyes. So you have to keep them both shut and focus on not, moving your eyes up or left or whatever. And it's I don't know how else to put it. It is a psychological thing more than physical at one point. being in darkness is a very trying thing. And for those that are blind, I guess there gets to be a point where they get used to it. But I struggle. I really, really, really struggle. And I haven't been in the situation where 3 days I was laid up in a long time. It's been a couple of years since that happened. But the only thing, I guess, there is a thorn in the flesh in Paul's life. Maybe that's my thorn. Whenever I'm really laid up, the only thing I can do is listen to things. I can't watch things. And so I usually revert to listening to the Bible. So maybe there is a dependency or a good thing that, kind of humbling me. I don't know. It is something I deal with, and it is not to say it's worse than most of you. It's a very apparent thing, right? When it's affecting me, I can't hide it from you. And so that's why everyone knows about it. Some Sundays I show up and it's bothering me greatly, and you know it. And I wish I could keep it from you. I hate that being a thing some Sundays, because we're here to talk about the things of God. I bring it up today because, again, being stuck in darkness, I can relate the things that you're used to doing and not being able to do, the pitch blackness. Well, even I've never experienced that. And I will say, though, being in darkness for extended periods of time, it unhinges me a little bit. It's very trying, and it begins to be more psychological, as Stephanie can attest. It becomes more psychologically straining on me than even physically after days on end. They were in pitch blackness for 3 days. And I can't even imagine what Egypt went through for 3 days, being in such blackness that, the idea of stumbling around and kind of getting into a place where you can see images, or a little bit like, at night, maybe you go into the bathroom and the lights are off, you can kind of feel your way around, where the light switch is. But if your power went out, you'd be able to get to your lights, you'd be able to find something, and you'd be able to make your way around your house somewhat. There'd be somewhat light coming in through your windows, even if it was from the moon. There'd be something. But they were in such pitch blackness, there was no getting used to it. There's no familiarity. All they could do was feel themselves around him. I would say, having been in darkness for 3 days, you're pretty much stuck with just laying down, and really you can't do anything. You just lay there. And for 3 days, I would imagine most of Egypt just stuck in their beds doing nothing because they could see nothing. But this darkness, as I like to think of it, or something I guess realized about it, is though it was meant for those that weren't prepared. So there was a preparing with the lamp. We talked about that last night, to gird your loins. There were those that were prepared with the lights. It was important that Israel had the lights shining. Once the darkness fell, there wasn't going to be anyone that was going to go and find their lanterns and be able to light it. It wasn't like it was today. They couldn't just get their lighter out. And, it was those that were unprepared without light were stuck in that condition. It was so dark that there was no way for them to start fire. And I'm sure God saw to it that nobody that was caught off guard was able to make fire and get their lantern or whatever it is that they had at the time kindled. And so it was kind of there. I mean, whoever had lights lit, they had it for those 3 days, and whoever didn't was stuck in that condition. That's what we talked about last week. Being girded, being ready. And the darkness, the thief of the night is coming. We want to be not of the darkness, we want to be of the day. The thief comes on those in darkness. Those of the day are like those that are ready, waiting for the bridegroom. Their loins are girded, and they're prepared and ready. Their lamps are lit, right? That's what we talked about. But let's be real. As we look at this condition that Israel is in, they're in Egypt. And what is happening to Egypt? There is darkness, absolute darkness. Egypt is in darkness. Israel have their lights lit. But to say that darkness was having no effect on Israel would be kind of misleading, right? Would be incorrect. They were not able to go outside, and they were told to stay in their homes with their lights, their lanterns lit and their lights lit. And this would be something that they would keep from Israel. It was for God's people. And it was for those that were prepared, and they had their lanterns lit. But of course, the darkness affected them. Their normal day of life, the darkness was outside, and it affected what they could do. It affected every aspect of their life. They couldn't go outside. They couldn't go about their daily business. And so there definitely is a parallel between that state and our condition. We are taught to have our lamps lit. We talked about that last week. To be ready with the lamp of the Christ, the light of Christ being lit in our life and in our homes and in our church. But we can't say that just because we are in the light that the darkness doesn't affect us. Of course it does. And so today we're going to talk about how to really balance that. What do we do concerning the darkness? How do we keep it out? And there's a lot of things that we can say that affects us, concerning the darkness. It affects every aspect of our life. Of course it does. It affects our work. It affects the things we do as far as hobbies and our play and our things we enjoy. It affects our social life. Of course, it affects our spiritual life. As I said, we strive to be faithful like the Lord, but we struggle in this condition. This flesh has a bit of darkness in it. So we are constantly contending in this flesh with ourself, with the darkness that is waiting and looming in our life. The Jews were certainly affected in every capacity, their social life, their work life, their whatever it is that they do. There's a lot of things that we think of when we think of the idea of darkness. We don't just relate the idea of sin to darkness, though that would probably be one of the more prevalent things. Like sometimes refer to it as a sense of hopelessness. And it's something that whenever I talk about being in a place of darkness, I'll talk about this in regard to relationships, both marital, and again, we referenced all the relationships earlier, but we have marital, we have siblings, we have parental and children relationships, and sometimes relationships get strained to the point where I say it just seems like there's no light at the end of the tunnel, right? You're in darkness. It's where usually divorce happens, is when you feel like you don't see the light, there is no light, and we feel like we're in this state of hopelessness. It gets that way in relationships, and that's why people get depressed. Depression has a way of convincing us that we're in a state of being that is hopeless and without any form of light. And yet we know that to be a chemical thing or an emotional thing. It's not real. We know better, especially as Christians. We know that there is no condition of man, both psychological and depressed state or relationship state, that God can't fix. We'll come to church, we'll hear the sermon, we'll aim in the point, but we get there in life. But our emotions and our brains, it is a brain because it's a chemical in our brain that sometimes makes us feel like we are in a place that can't be fixed. And so I always refer to that as a place of darkness. And certainly that's one of the things that we relate to, that idea of being in darkness, right? Hopelessness. Last week we talked about it as being someone who's asleep. And Christ talks about this in the New Testament, Paul talks about this. The idea of being in darkness is for those who are asleep. He says, don't be of those in darkness. Don't be asleep like the world, like the heathen, but be those who are awake, whose belts are girded, and we're ready, right? So there's that idea of being asleep. Darkness carries, and this is natural, carries the idea of fear. It's amazing. It's so sad that we live in such a politically correct, that people relate the idea of darkness and light to the color of someone's skin. It's sickness. That's not something, I don't know about you, but when I think about darkness and light, I'm not thinking about people's skin color. That's sick. I'm thinking about things that are just natural. It's not racist to think of negative things when you think of darkness as completely unrelated to someone's culture or skin color. It's ridiculous. And to make it a thing of racist, it's in the Bible, and people call themselves Christians, but then make these things. It's completely missing the point. There's natural things that we relate to darkness, not about people's skin color. And again, that's not even something I'll even talk about, whether we relate someone's skin color in darkness relating to anything negative. I'm not even talking about that here because we all know better. But kids are naturally afraid of the dark. Even adults are afraid. Sometimes I'm afraid of the dark. When I come over to the church and I kind of come through here and I realize I'm going to come down this hallway, you think I walk down this hallway at night without turning on the light first? Actually, there's no light to control this hallway. So I go down to the classrooms and I flip on each light of the classrooms because I'm not going to walk down through the church in darkness. I'm sorry. I'm not afraid of the dark, but I guess I am. I don't think of myself. I think it's a natural thing. We're afraid of the dark. It's the unknown. We don't know what's in the dark. There's so many principles that are natural that I think are all in place because that way, again, it's not a coincidence. God doesn't take creation and then teach them in biblical spiritual principles as if it's like he's just drawing off this creation by some chance. He created it this way so that we would see these godly principles naturally in the world. We're afraid of the darkness. We should be afraid of the darkness. Both physically, I guess maybe it's, if you're not, that's okay. But I mean, spiritually, we should be afraid of the darkness. There is dark things. We want to be afraid of those things. And unfortunately, spiritually speaking, our flesh, because it's dark, is drawn to those things. Darkness is drawn to darkness. Spiritually light things are drawn to spiritually light things. So there are natural things that we should be afraid of. I mean, we are afraid of, but correlate them to the spiritual things, of course. Fear, the unknown. Darkness is associated with pain and suffering. It's associated with hate. It's associated with hatred, hateness. I almost said, I did now say hateness, hatred. We associate it with sin, as is a very strong spiritual principle in the Bible. We also associate it with death. We must work the works of light while it's still day, because darkness is coming, which no man can work. Straight out of the mouth of Christ, referring to light and day. I mean, light being day and darkness being night as life and death. You're alive, so work the works of light, of day, of life, while you have life, because darkness is coming when you no longer have this opportunity. So there's all these things that we correlate it to. And of course, life is just filled with these things. It's filled with darkness, whether we're talking about physical things, spiritual things, and we compare ourselves to this condition, the state, this place that Israel's in Egypt. They're in the world, but they're not of the world. And the darkness of Egypt is just engulfing their life. And all they have is the light shining in their homes to get them by. And I think sometimes we feel that way. And as we talked about last week, we need to be a people who have our lights lit, that in this place of darkness are ready, because darkness is here upon the world, and the thief is coming upon those of darkness, and he is coming to rescue those of the light out of darkness. And again, another point we'll make in just a little bit, but we're all affected by it, and it's the thing I wanted to kind of continue on from last week. We talked about not being in darkness, being in the light, but let's acknowledge the fact that we are in a world of darkness, and this world is filled with it. And more, we're seeing that this darkness that we are surrounded by is becoming like, more prevalent. It's becoming thicker and thicker, and the light is getting rarer and rarer. And we're seeing it all around us. And it's just, we've been saying this my whole life, but look no further than our TV, our news channels. And again, we can all say that, especially in the last 20 years, we can really see as TV, the shows we watch, TV, the news, where place we get our news from, it's just getting darker and darker and darker. And that's a reflection of the world we live in. Not on people. I don't like looking at individuals and judging them. We're not taught to do so. Don't look at the speck in anyone's eye or our brother's eye and try to remove it when we have a plank in our own eyes. So I don't want to even judge the world, but I can look at and feel the effect of this darkness. You can feel it. I don't got to look at someone's life and judge the individual. I can feel it. It's thick, right? It's a darkness that can be felt, and we can say clearly that we could have said this at any time in our life, that we live in dark times. It's been true since the foundation of the earth, that there has been darkness in sin and in difficulties, and again, fear, unknown, pain, suffering, hate, sin, hopelessness, sleeping. Spiritual darkness is getting thicker and thicker. But we see as the day of the Lord approaches that it is getting stronger and stronger. The darkness is getting thicker and thicker, and we feel it more and more. It's getting harder and harder to kind of ignore the darkness that's engulfing us. And I think that's where I kind of relate us to this story here. There might be times that we can feel like we could do things and not feel affected by darkness. But I feel like we're in a place now where the only place I feel like I'm not affected by it is when I'm just at home and electronics are off and it's just me and my family, right? Kind of the same place as Israel. If you turn on your electrical device, which is an outlet to the world, you see and feel the darkness. If you go outside, you go to work, you go to any outing, any event, you feel and see the darkness. And so it's getting more and more so. And I feel like this is becoming our condition. Where the only time we feel like we're separate from this darkness, not feeling its effect, is when we're just in our homes or in our church building and we're just together. And it's just God's people with his light, with his lamp, and with his spirit. And we just feel like we're in his presence. And we can feel some reprieve from the darkness, from the shadows looming in our life, and even from reprieve from our flesh, because where are we the most spiritual is here. So this is our safe haven. It's what it should be, at least. It should be a place that we come and where we get a break from all the things, all the stresses, all the worries, all the concerns, all the darkness, both outside and within, that we can come and be here in the presence of God and cast all that stuff off. It's where we come to expose our darkness to the light, that we be able to correct those things. So we come here recognizing that we all bring a carnal flesh in here, but we're coming to expose it to the light, which is his word and his spirit, to God, that it may shine light in that darkness, that it might purge out that darkness. And what great example that we get from this story here about what I think we're going through. Sin affects us all, but sin of the world, sin in our life, and this is a great place that we go to. Life is filled with darkness, and certainly hardships, sufferings. But as I always remind us, the Bible reminds us through illustrations, where there is hardship, where there is darkness in this life, it is not of the doings of the light. It doesn't even make any sense. The darkness is the absence of the light. All hardship, all sufferings are due to sin. It's due to a lack of God, not due to God. When God made the earth, it was filled with his glory, with his light. There was no darkness. But when man turned to Satan and ate of the fruit, we brought darkness into the equation, and we've been struggling with this darkness ever since. And we brought him into the equation. So where there's death and hardship, where you suffer, when you're suffering in this life, it is not due to God, it's due to sin. So we don't turn from God or blame God, we give it to God. How else are we going to fix the darkness if we don't give it to the light? God provided light for the Jews, and obviously he still does. So there's things that we associate with the light. We associate certain things with darkness, but everything that we would say, that we say, these are things that we relate to darkness, we correlate with them, we would say the exact opposite things correlate with the things of the light, the exact opposite. Where we see hopelessness in darkness, we see in light, there's hope. That's why I say light at the end of the tunnel. We get to a place where we feel there's no light, and we feel in darkness, and we're not seeing the light. And again, I make this point, I made it a lot lately. But it's important to know better, because sometimes we feel that there's darkness only, but we can know better than how we feel. Again, there's chemical things, all sorts of mental states that we can be in where we feel like there's no hope, but you can know there's hope even when you feel like there's no hope. There's always hope. And we associate sleeping with darkness. So what do we associate with the light? Being awake. So we associate fear with safety, pain with peace, hopelessness, or that the unknown with knowledge, hate with love, sin with righteousness, death with life, sleep with being awake. John 8:12 says, I am the Lord. I'm the light of this world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. So Christ is the one that brings the light into the equation. So what a great example. Their lights being lit in a place of darkness. How do you deal with the darkness in your life? How do we deal with the darkness? We are to be of the light, children of the light. We are to not be in darkness. Like the world, we're not to be sleeping. We are to have our loins girded, being ready. But how do we deal with the darkness that continues to try to impede upon our life and to attack us? we still, the same way that we find ourselves in the light, we deal with it by putting on Christ. We deal with it by turning to Christ. He is the light of this world. We turn and we give these things to God. Where we feel fear, where we feel pain, where we feel hopelessness, where we feel sin, where we feel any form of desperation, we give it to the Lord because he is the light of this world in all capacities, in all ways. The light of Christ is, kind of going back to what Russell was saying and talking about being a fisher of men. As I often talk about being the light of this world, Christ is the light of the world. We are to be the light of the world. We are to let that light of Christ shine in our life in every way. And one of the ways that we like to think about being the light, a lighthouse, is through our verbal testimonies. Although I agree with that, but I don't think that's the strongest or the most prevalent way that we should be being the light of this world. I think above all things, the idea of being the light is in our actions, how we're living, being that representative of the light in all areas of light, in all areas of this world, in all areas of darkness. We acknowledge this about the darkness, that it is getting thicker. I believe that. I think you see that too. But there's another thing about darkness that is definitely true. And that is, the darker it is, the brighter that a light source shines. Now, that's why we don't here in Southern California see a lot of stars, because we live in such a lit up sky. But the darker something is, the darker, that's another example that my dad used to use. I always remember these things because they resonate with me. That they would go down to this dark cave, they'd turn off the light, and then he said you could feel the darkness. And then what would the tour guide would do is they would strike a match. And he said it would light up the cave as if like all the lights were on, because that little light source, even though it was so small, it was shining in such a dark place, it was more powerful. Whereas again, if it was lightly dimmed in there, you would barely even notice the flicker of that light. And so, yeah, we live in this dark place. I don't like to judge the world, but recognizing the darkness, I don't think we should be intimidated by the darkness. I think there's another mindset that we could put on that, though, yeah, we live in dark times, the light that we put on should have a great effect. It should be quite visible. We're afraid of that light. I don't know why it is that we're afraid of standing out as the light of Christ. Perhaps it's a pride thing or a peaceable thing. I don't know what it is, a weakness. But the world, as it's more and more standing for things that go against what the Bible teaches, it's becoming harder and harder for those that are of the light to speak their mind. And, we've talked about it a lot lately, where you could be canceled at work, you could be canceled on social media, you could be canceled in any area of life, just for speaking spiritual truths, by shining the light in the darkness, because the darkness hates the light as it hated Christ. And so as we shine the light, the darkness wants to snuff it out. But I just really want us to point out that even though there is much darkness, that should mean actually that we as the light are having a bigger impact, that we stand out more, and that it's harder to ignore us. The light of Christ should be shining out in our hearts, in our homes, in our churches, and certainly not just out of our mouths, but in our life. Let's read a verse real quickly. Matthew chapter 5. It kind of directs us as being the light. I already kind of blew it. I already mentioned this verse. But let's read it anyways. Matthew chapter 5. Verse 14, it says, "You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor does anyone light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven." We've already identified the source of the light. This is something that we've taught over and over again, but I'm not teaching us for head knowledge this. If you're here today and you don't know the source of the light, then it's clear and evident that it is Christ. But I think we all know that the source of all light is Christ. We already kind of pointed at him. He is the light of the world, not his people. He is the light of the world. So how do we cast the light onto the world? By putting on Christ. So the Bible teaches us to be a lamp, not something that's hidden. There was only one time that I think the light was ever told to be hidden. That was probably during that 9th plague. I don't think it was to be shared with the others, because this was a time of judgment. And there comes a time when there will be judgment, when darkness will reign, and those in darkness will remain forever, and those in the light will remain forever. And there's a picture of those 3 days being the finality. We'll talk about that final conclusion of those 3 days at the end of the sermon. But in the meantime, we are taught to do the opposite, to share the light. You don't have a light and then hide it under a lamp. What would under a bushel? You don't put it under a basket. You don't hide it. The idea of having light lit is to shine it. You wouldn't turn on your light at home, your lamp, and then just like put something around it. You turn it on, you have it to shine light. We have the light for a purpose. God has not given it to us to just have and have here in this place. It is good that we have the light in this place. This is our safe haven, as I said. This is where we come to just be away from the darkness, right? To be charged like a battery. Not to go back out into the world to hide the light, but we're recharging the battery to go shine that light into the world. We don't have the light to keep it and to have it and hide it. We have the light to share it, to be fishers of men, to not just go out and talk about it, but to walk in the light, to live in the light, that people may see our life so that they will glorify us. That's not what it says, but it says that people will see the light, and then as it said in verse 16, they will see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. That's why we shine the light. We live the life of Christ. We work the works of God, that people see God and not us. And if we do something to be seen by men, then we are robbing from God his glory. And God gets none. You get none. Actually, let's say whatever you do get from men, that's all you get. But God wants us to shine his glory, that he get it, that he gets the glory. And then if we want anything in return, that will be God's doing. He'll reward those who shine his light for the right reason. And as I said, we can't use the darkness of this world as an excuse for why we're not going out into the world for shining. There is no excuse. We are left on this earth with this sole purpose, to make disciples of men and to teach them how to put on the light. That's why we're here, to continue the light, to continue passing on the light. Light doesn't, as a side note, light doesn't just spontaneously burst. I know people there's that spontaneous combustion where people just all of a sudden go up in flames. I've never heard of an explanation as to why that. I think people have come to some conclusions, but the light of Christ just doesn't spontaneously just happen. The light of Christ was here 2,000 years ago. Now, we had his teachings before that, but looking at the light of Christ, he started a church, and that light was a picture of him. And since that time, we've been called a lampstand, right? There is a flame, there is a fire, that is his spirit, that is his truth. And since that day, his light has been passed down from church to church, from lampstand to lampstand. And here we are today. Why do we have the light? Not because we are so smart that one day we just opened the Bible and we started studying, we figured it out, and we just started a church. This is the light that's been passed down for 2,000 years. Why are we so grateful? And why are we so fortunate? That's an answer I don't have, but I do know that where I don't have answers to why we're so fortunate to have the light, we should be overly grateful and compelled to be faithful as a sign of our thanksgiving, right? As a reflection of our gratitude. But this light's been handed down from generation to generation. And here we are 2,000 years later. Why? Because people live the light. They shine the light. They converted people unto the cause. Church missionaries were surrendered. Missionaries were sent out. The churches were started where they became a lighthouse in their community, where people were one, and then missionaries were made and they were sent out. I mean, this all comes down to the local assembly being a light, the members of that local assembly making disciples of men, going out into the world, bringing people unto the Lord, that they too may be able to be taught, may be able to surrender unto the light and put on the light themselves. And so we have a responsibility. We're here because of this. We are here because of churches like us being a lighthouse. And we are to carry on that, it's not a baton, right? It's more like the Olympics, that Olympic torch. We have been tasked with carrying on this torch, and our responsibility isn't just to live it out until the Lord returns or until we die. It's to pass it on to others, to be that light. It's our responsibility. And we shouldn't be ashamed of the light. The darkness wants to shame the light, but that's because they hate the light, they reject it. It's not because there is anything shameful about the light. When they see the light, they see Christ, and it shames them. So let's not be ashamed of the light. They're the ones that are ashamed. That's why they try to guilt us. Let's talk about being called out of darkness real quickly, because I want to make this point in Colossians 1. Because I didn't really want this to be about being called out of the light. I wanted the sermon to be more about us dealing with the darkness that surrounds us, right? As Israel had to, as we are those that should be ready for the return of the Lord, having our loins girded, being of the light, not of darkness, but we still have to contend with it. So, but I want to make this point for those that may need to find the Lord today, that may need to put on the Lord, that don't have the Lord. Colossians 1 verse 9, for this reason also, since the day we heard of it, we have not ceased to pray for you and to ask that you may be filled with the knowledge, to pray for you and to ask you to be filled with I think I just read that, filled with the knowledge of his will and all spiritual wisdom and understanding. We see a lot of examples of the light there, the knowledge, the wisdom, the understanding. You be filled with the light so that you'll walk in a manner worthy of the Lord. So have a walking in the light, to please him in all respects, bearing fruit, which is the effect of shining the light, right? Bearing fruit in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God. Strengthened, another picture of the light, with all power according to his glorious might, for the attaining of all steadfastness and patience joyously, giving thanks to the Father who has qualified us to share in his inheritance, in the inheritance of the saints of the light. So here we are, in a position, being brought into a position to share the inheritance of those saints in the light. For he rescued us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the knowledge of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. He is the one that calls us out of darkness. We have the light, as only he gets the credit, right? We only have the light. Thanks be to him. We were called out of darkness, both by way of in darkness in the world in Egypt, right? When he called us out of darkness, when we don't know what conviction feels like, when people don't know, when we use this word conviction and being under conviction, it's a word we just throw around. We have a lot of terminologies we use as God's people. We talk about being saved a lot. I like using the term born again in reference to the, passing from death into life spiritually. But we use a lot of terminologies. And a lot of people, I guess, aren't fully familiar with this idea of conviction, that what we call it. I refer to it more of like a calling. You feel a calling of God. People talk about this in the natural world, having a calling in life. You just feel this overwhelming desire to do something. Some people do this with their life choices, with their career choices, People make reference to this idea of being called into something in all sorts of areas of life, but I don't know that I've ever felt it nearly as strong as when I'm called by God to do things. There's this overwhelming just uneasiness, unsettled feeling like things aren't right. And you feel this compulsion to do something about it, right? And it is God's way of saying, in darkness, I am calling you forth from that darkness unto the light. And I've been there. The first time I really feel like I felt it was, as I talk about all the time, was at church camp when I was 15 years old. And I even referenced it last week, as I was sitting there hearing another sermon preached. And at one point, I couldn't hear the preacher anymore because I felt so unsettled in my pew, so uneasy. There was one thing I felt, and I don't know that I would have used this expression then, but as I look back and I feel, and I can relive that emotion, it was like feeling like I'm sitting there in darkness. You know, the fear, the uneasiness, the unknown, all the things that we associate, sin. You know, again, I think I just said this, the hopelessness. You feel all these things. You feel the state of sin. You feel the darkness that comes along with it. And I remember I just felt so uneasy. I couldn't hear the preacher. I just felt this calling forth from the darkness. I felt uneasy. I felt unsettled. I felt like God was calling me to do something about it. And we have an invitation at the end of services. And that's what we had at this church camp. An opportunity to give people that are under conviction, that are being called from darkness or whatever they're being dealing with, that they have an opportunity to respond to God. And so that darkness, that unsettledness, as soon as that invitation hit, I knew one thing: I didn't want to be in darkness. There was a light calling me. I saw a light at the end of the tunnel, and I just went to it. And I went down to the altar and I dropped down before the light. And I know a lot of these things, it's not the way I would explain it then, but man, this is exactly what happened. I fell down before the light and I asked it to come into my life. I asked God to forgive me for my darkness. I didn't even say that, right? It was in my heart. I threw myself down and I just said, God, save me. And we refer to the feeling of what it feels like to be born again as this weightlessness, right? The burdens of sin. I felt the light of God come into my life and peace where there was once uneasiness, right? Or suffering. I felt a sense of being in the known. I wasn't in the unknown. I wasn't scared anymore. I felt like the light of God had come into my life and I was no longer in darkness. And maybe that's where you are today. You know, you've never trusted in Jesus Christ as your Savior and you feel that uneasiness. And all I can say is if you feel uneasy and you feel like something's calling you, that's the light. Why would you want to be in darkness anymore? The light is calling you forth from darkness and it wants to call you unto himself. And all you have to do is let go of the darkness and trust in the light. You know, let the light of God come into your life. Maybe it's not just there today. Again, maybe you found yourself kind of like, as we have the light of Israel in our life, but maybe you've let a little bit too much of that darkness of Israel into your life. And we, for some reason, even as God's people, we hold on to these areas of life where we want the darkness. We feel like we can just allow it to remain a little longer. If you're unsettled, if you feel like there's something in your life, some darkness that God is calling you forth from today, he's calling you for a reason. You know, he wouldn't be calling you if that darkness was acceptable in his eyes. He's calling you from it because he wants to bring the light into your life to help you where there's darkness. A couple more passages and we'll try to bring things to a close. John chapter 12, we're going to read just a couple verses here. I referred to these verses already, but I want to read them. Verse 35. So Jesus said to them, for a little while longer, the light is among you. Walk while you have the light, so the darkness will not overtake you. He who walks in the darkness does not know where he goes. While you have the light, believe in the light, so that you may become sons of the light. Those things Jesus spoke, and he went away and he hid himself from them. There's two places, one where he refers to, clearly referring to it as your life, and here he's referring to it as himself. That there is light in your life. Believe in the light while you still have the light. Now there's still opportunity. Believe in the light. So one, he's referring to your life, and in another example, himself. And he's saying, believe in the light. So here today, if you're alive, and you are, and there's being a calling from darkness, and there's opportunity that God's given you. Believe in the light. Believe in the light while you still have opportunity. But ultimately, what he's referring to here is himself as the light. Believe in me while I'm still here. Believe in the light while I'm still here, because the light was going to be snuffed out, the light of Christ. They would put him to death. And so there was opportunity for those that were there to believe and to trust and to follow the Lord. But he's also giving way to understand that his time on earth was going to come to an end. And they needed to believe in him. Their life would one day come to an end, and they needed to believe in him. Jesus Christ would later be crucified. Matthew 27, I want to read a few verses here too, going kind of relating things back to darkness real quickly, to those 3 days of darkness. In Matthew 27, we'll read 6 verses here, starting in verse 45. There's so many beautiful ways that God has sewn and weaved things into this world that all speak unto him, that point to him. There's so many beautiful stories through our history as God's people, through the history of Abraham and his children and God's people in Israel, that speak to prophetic events. As I said, all those plagues, and especially the 9th one, how it correlates with us. The 10th one, how that one is this great picture of the application of the blood. And he can also, as he's revealing to us some pictures for us of being in the world, but not of the world, and being in darkness, having our lamps lit, final judgment. He's also at the same time revealing himself through the story of the 3 days of darkness. Christ too faced darkness. Darkness befell the final hours of his life on earth. And in the final 3 hours of his life, the world was struck with darkness, at least that local area of Israel where he was being crucified. Verse 45, it says, now from the 6th hour, darkness fell upon the land until the 9th hour. So from noonish until 3 o'clock-ish. That's 3 hours. So 3 hours. 3 hours of darkness. After the 9th hour, Christ cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, that is, my God, why have you forsaken me? And some of those who were standing there, when they heard it, began saying, this man is calling for Elijah. Immediately, one of them ran, and taking a sponge, he filled it with sour wine and put it on a reed and gave him a drink. But the rest of them said, let us see whether Elijah will come and save him. And Jesus cried out with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. The final 3 hours of his life, 3 hours befell the world in darkness. You know, again, the light was there among them, and they crucified it. They crucified it in darkness. They snuffed out his life. How long was he in the grave? So the light of life, the light of the world, was in the grave for 3 days. And that's that great picture from that 9th plague. The darkness befell the earth because the light was gone. They crucified it, and he was buried for 3 days. There was no light on earth. And those who had the light still lived in it. They had it in their homes, but the light was snuffed out. He was crucified. And we have this great picture in this 9th plague of Christ, being crucified on our behalf. The light was crucified. But why? That the light of life, that the light of the world might be given to men. He was in the grave for 3 days, but he wasn't there permanently. He came forth from the grave. From there, the light has been shining in this earth for 2,000 years through his New Testament church. We are grateful. I am grateful. I'm sure you are today, to be in the presence of God, to have the light, how lucky we are to have it. Praise be to God. We only have so much longer in this world, and we need to be motivated in these final hours, these final days, that as darkness is getting stronger, I think it doesn't mean that we need to get dimmer. We need to get brighter. That's the natural way of the world. And so there's a reflection there. As the world gets darker, we need to shine brighter. The darkness is getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And I think there comes this darkness that's befalling the world, but it is not permanent. I'm going to read a couple verses. You don't have to turn here to close things out. Revelations 21, verse 23. The city had no need of the sun or of the moon to shine on it. The glory of God has illuminated it, and its lamp is the Lamb. The nations will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it. In the daytime, for there will be no night there, its gates will never be closed, and they will bring the glory and honor of the nations into it. And nothing unclean, and no one who practices abominations and lying shall ever come into it, but only those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life. And there's this hope at the end of all this, right? Because of Christ, because of his crucifixion, because the light shined on the earth and the darkness hated him, and they crucified him and they buried him. And for 3 days he was in the grave, coming out, and ever since, again, his light being with God's people. And because of his work, he has given hope to mankind. We have hope because of this, that we can be a part of a kingdom, a people who darkness will never touch ever again. It's that place that the Bible refers to as that haven of rest. There is rest for the weary. There is rest for those who seek it. But, the rest comes through by means of Christ. And as the darkness gets stronger and stronger, there comes a day when the sky will break open and the light will appear before men, and he will shine and purge out the darkness through judgment, and will establish a kingdom where light will shine. It says there will never be darkness again. There will never be all those things that we associate with darkness. All the pain, all the sufferings, all the hardships, all the hopelessness, all those dark feelings and thoughts we get as men, all those, all the pain and tribulations that we feel, all those things, along with the natural darkness, all those spiritual applications will be purged out forevermore. Never once again in the kingdom of God will you feel those things of the darkness. You will never feel fear or pain or suffering. Put your trust in Jesus Christ. Put your hope in him. Because for those in whom don't, they will be consumed in darkness. His judgment was final, right? Those 3 days of the ninth plague, it's an absolute. The light couldn't be shined. It couldn't be shared. There was a final judgment. And it's a picture of there's a final day when the light shines, that those in darkness will be permanently in darkness forever. Here's an opportunity. Trust in the light. Expose yourself. Give into the light today before it's too late. Once the Lord returns, those that are unprepared, whose loins are not girded, it is permanent. It is a permanent condition when the Lord returns. If you don't know the Lord today, won't you come down? Won't you trust in him before it's too late? Because we can put him off another day, but the Bible doesn't teach us to put him off. It says today is the day of salvation. Let's stand and let's have a verse of song. Let's give opportunity, as I said, we have opportunity during the invitation to respond. Do you feel uneasy? Do you feel unsettled? Do you feel darkness? Do you feel a looming presence of uneasiness? Do you feel a source of light calling you from it? God's calling you. There's no reason to put him off. God's calling me today. Won't you come and bow down before the Lord, even in what page?
315. 315. Into the heart of Jesus, deeper and deeper I go, seeking to know the reason why he should love me so, why he should stoop to lift me up from the miry clay, saving my soul, making me whole. waiting for grace to follow, seeking his way to know, bowing in full surrender, low at his blessed feet, bidding him take, reign and make, till I am molded and meet.
Probably part of, I don't know, something I was thinking about this week. Well, I might be way off. You know, like sometimes there's just like darkness is also, we think of deception, right? So distraction, and we have a lot of that we face. Deception, and again, light is truth. There's a lot of ways that we can, so there's almost endless parallels that we can make. with light and darkness. All week, I don't know, there's just when they keep making this big to do about this girl that's missing. What are we distracting us from? There's, and I'm not saying I have an answer, no offense to her life, I know it's a compelling story, and that's all the news wants about it. It's weird to me, that we're all focused on the life of one young lady who was, there's tons of lives that we can focus on, what are they distracting us from? There's all these, life is a distraction, it's one big great distraction and deception. And sometimes I get caught up in these things and then have to destroy myself. It's not for us, it's not for me. We just get focused and centered on the things of God. And I get caught up in the politics, I get caught up in the things, the social things that the world's caught up in. And we get to be centered on Christ. That's where our heart and minds need to be. Don't let the world, again, whether it's deceiving us from the real stories about, and I was thinking maybe it's about that missile that killed a bunch of innocent people that came out this week. I don't know what they're distracting us from. But one thing I know for sure is that it can be spiritually distracting for me. And so, just one last thought. Let's make sure that we're not distracted by the darkness and deceptions and things going on in the world. Let's be refocused. As Russell said, let's go out this week and focus on shining the light of Christ and being fishers of men. Let's make that our priority. And not all these other things going on. Is there any prayer requests, any last words before we are dismissed?
Larry, we still need to keep them.
Thanks for your.
They're struggling with us.
Larry is still pastorless, so there's some needs there. And I'm not really sure what they're gonna do. God will help them figure that out. Let's pray for God to help them do so. Anybody else? All right,
Brother Nick,
yeah.
I have something. I just wanted to tell you guys are awesome. Thank you so much for your love offering. It was a huge blessing to us. And just some more I wanted to share, just because sometimes I think it's good to share. Last Sunday when I went home, I had to go into my room and I fell on my knees. And I asked forgiveness for worrying and for doubting. But all this week has been loads of blessings. And it started with your guys' love offering. And thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing that. There's nothing I can add to that. It's just, we're God's people. We're here, we're in this together, and we're just glad we can be of help. More so, I'm glad that we felt God's blessings in other areas for that as well. Anybody else? It's good to share, especially the blessing. We have prayer requests, and then we bring up all the hardships, but it's good to share the blessings. Let's go ahead and be dismissed. I don't see any hands up, so we'll be dismissed. We'll have lunch and we'll meet back here about 1:30. To dismiss this, Armand, would you do so?
Dear Father, we ask and pray that you please be with the prayer requests that have been mentioned, Father, that the words that have been spoken to you so far, Lord, that we take it and our hearts be open to it, and our minds be open to it, that we are able to go out into the world and be the fishers of men, Lord. Heavenly Father, we ask and pray that you also be with those who are still struggling in their faith, that
are still away and still living in the world, Father, that you put fear in their hearts, that they come searching for you again. Lord, we ask and pray that you please be with those who still don't know you as the Lord and Savior. Please ask that you be with the sick and ill, Lord, and that you please be with all the service men and women that are out there, Lord. And Lord, we ask and pray, please bless the food that we will partake of. That you bring us back here all safe. In Jesus' name.
Amen.